Okay, we do not learn to move, we move in order to learn. Let me repeat that for you because it's important. We do not learn to move, we move in order to learn. And the movements that we make during infancy and even in utero are critical in determining whether we will have a mature, efficient, and organized brain, or whether we will be challenged with an immature, inefficient, and disorganized brain. My name is Sandy Smith, and I am the neurodevelopmental specialist at Carolina's Biofeedback Clinic in Charlotte. I'm also a mom of 3. All 3 of my children are in their mid-20s. They're all at different levels of adulting right now. I'm also a former teacher. I spent almost 2 decades teaching a preschool classroom called transitional kindergarten that was for children who were old enough to be in kindergarten but weren't quite ready yet. And that was my task, was getting them ready for that first entry into school. I did that for 18 years and absolutely loved it. Childhood development is my hobby. It is now also my career. I would like to start by reading you a staggering statistic. And I'm going to read it, so number 1, I don't mess it up, and number 2, you know I didn't make it up. It is estimated that half of all of our knowledge, our life's knowledge, is locked in during the first year. During the second year, we learn half as much as we did during the first year. So that means by age 2, we have learned 75% of everything we will learn in our lifetime. 75%. Whether you are an unemployed person or a NASA rocket scientist, 75% of your learning was learned in the first 2 years of your life. So what is all this early learning? How does it relate to our lives right now? What happens if you are 7 or 8 or 12 or 15 or 55 and your first 2 years were a little bumpy? So let's take a look. What we're going to look at today is something called the developmental sequence. It is how our brains develop. It is the process by which our brains grow and we get access to all the parts of our brain, but it is also how our functioning skills develop. So there is a handout of this if you didn't get it. You can grab one, I have plenty of them. This is a chart of the developmental sequence, and it is basically the summary of about 2 decades of research that was done back in the 1960s, 50s, and early 60s. Out of this research came work called neurodevelopmental movement, and that's what I do in my career. It's not important that you read all of those words on that chart. There's a whole bunch of words, but it is important that we understand how it's laid out, because that's the theory, that's the understanding, that's the research that makes it all make sense. So the colored rows going up the left-hand side are the actual time periods when different parts of the brain are becoming accessible to the little human being. So we know that when we're born, we have our full brain, we have a full central nervous system, but we don't have access to all of it. A newborn baby cannot walk or talk or eat solid foods. We can't do that until our brains have matured and we have learned how to do those things. So we have the full central nervous system, we don't have access to it at birth. So as the brain matures, those skills come along with it. So what the research learned was that as actual brain parts were being accessed, there were 6 areas of skill, 6 areas of functioning that were also developing right along with the brain. And so those 6 areas of function are what we're going to talk about. 3 of them are input systems, our visual system, how we take in what we see and what our brains do with that. Our auditory system, how we take in the things that we hear, how we process them and relate to them. Our tactile system, how we feel things around us, things like how we feel our clothes, but also internally. How do we feel hunger? How do we feel pain? How do we feel the emotions of empathy and compassion and sympathy are related to that as well. The right-hand side of the chart are our outputs. Movement, how do we get from point A to point B? How do we move around in the world? Language, how do we communicate with others? And how do we communicate with the world? And then hand function, which is unique to humans in how we can use pencils and tools and forks and spoons and all of those things. When you look at the chart, the green areas up are our cortical areas. You may have heard that word. Our cortexes are the outside part of our brain. Our cortexes are our thinking, rational brain. It's where we learn. All the homeschooling that you're doing, when you are teaching your children, you are working in their cortexes, and you're making connections in those cortical levels. All the experiences that you are giving your children are creating connections in their cortexes, in their thinking brains. The parts that are below the green, the red, orange, and yellow, those are pre-cortical levels. And what those are the parts of your brain that developed before your thinking brain developed. So when you are an infant and you cry, it is not because your rational brain says, it's 2 o'clock, I would like to eat now, I will start crying. The cry from an infant is because they have a sensation that they feel that causes them to give an output, which is a cry that needs a response from you, but it is not a logical thinking process. You know this if you have a baby that's about 4 months old and it gets hungry. When that baby gets hungry, it screams and it cries until you feed it. You can't look at that little baby and go, oh, just give me about 10 minutes. Mommy's got something she needs to finish up. No, that baby wants food and it wants it right now. It's because that level of our brain is our emergency brain, and everything at that level is life or death to that brain. We know it's not life and death. We have logical thinking brains. We know that that little baby is not going to die if it has to wait 10 minutes to eat, but you can't convince that little baby of that when it is screaming and crying. So we're going to talk about the lower levels and what impact they have on the upper level. But first, I want to show you the upper level, the cortex, because this kind of makes everything make sense. So our cortex is our thinking, rational brain. It's where our intentional learning takes place, and it's the home of our coping skills. So if any of you have kids that are that struggle with, say, attention issues, and you make lists for them, or you try to teach them to make a list to follow so that they don't forget things, that's a coping skill. That's you're working in their cortex to give them a coping skill for maybe some disorganization that has gone on before. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to start at the bottom, the earliest and most simple, or not simple, but the earliest level, is our medulla and our spinal cord. So our spinal cord goes right up the spine. Just at the top of it is something called the medulla. That is the brain that we have access to when we are first born. For about the first few weeks of life, we have access to what is basically a reflexive brain. Everything that this baby does is reflexes. So for example, you might remember that if you rub a little infant baby on the cheek, they will open their mouth and turn their head to that side. That's a reflex based on a sensory input that you give. And so that is the reflex brain going, oh, that touch means I do this. And it is the way we were designed so that we can stay alive. How does a baby find food? You hold the baby up next to your breast, and it rubs the baby on the cheek, and the baby turns their head and opens their mouth, and voila, dinner. That's how our brains are wired to work when we are infants. We have something called a startle reflex. Newborn babies jerk a lot because they startle at almost everything. They startle at what appears to be nothing because that auditory system is very, very immature. So every time something alerts the auditory system, the baby will startle. Whether we heard a sound or not, the little infant brain did. There's another one that's really interesting, one of our reflexes, and I like to do this one because it's just fun. Excuse me. It's called a spinal galant reflex. And we were designed with it so that we could be born, and then we don't need it anymore. But it's really cool. If you rub a newborn baby just to the side of their spine on their back, their hip will wiggle. Their opposite hip will go up. It's a reflex. You give the sensation, their hip will move. So when they are in utero and it's time for them to be born, the mother's contractions hit that spot on the baby's back as part of lots of things that go on with contractions. This is one of them. It hits that spot on the baby's back and the baby's hip wiggles. And then a few minutes later or an hour later, or however your contractions were, it hits that spot again, or on the other side, and the other hip wiggles. And over the course of a couple of hours, that movement helps the baby work its way down the birth canal so that you can be born. Hooray! Once you are born, you are never going to make that trip again. So you don't need that reflex. So by about 6 months of age or so, that reflex integrates into voluntary movements to where now, if someone rubs me on my back in that spot, my hip doesn't automatically wiggle like it would have when I was a newborn baby. Where do we see this? Sometimes, this is what, if you've heard of retained reflexes, this is a really common one. Because if you have a retained spinal galant reflex and something happens to touch that spot on your back, it will cause your hip to wiggle. Sometimes it's a big wiggle, sometimes it's ever so slight that you don't even know it's happening. What we see is our really fidgety kids. When they sit down in a chair, the next thing you know, they're slouched down like this behind the table, and you are at dinner and you say, hey, sit up, or you're trying to do math or whatever. And as the chair hits that spot on their back, their hip wiggles. And then the other hip, and then the other hip. And the next thing you know, they have fallen in the floor now. You're like, Johnny, why are you on the floor? I don't know. They really don't. They're not trying to be disrespectful. They have a retained reflex that causes them to wiggle. Our kids with really poor posture many times have this retained reflex. So, in a school setting, the teacher says to them, I'm going to tell your mommy. Well, you're like, I'm going to tell your daddy when he gets home because you are not paying attention to what I'm trying to do with you today. But it has nothing to do with them being able to pay attention. If they're trying so hard to stay seated in their chair, they're using all of their thinking brain to keep their body still. Guess what their thinking brain doesn't have any room to do? Learn math facts. Learn how to read, learn what their vowels are, learn what a verb is or an adverb or, whatever you're trying to teach them that day. If they're having to spend all of their cortical energy to compensate for something that should be automatic but is not, then they have a really difficult time reading. And that's just from our first couple of weeks of life. All right, pretty soon we move up to the next level. And again, there is a particular part of our brain that's called the pons. And the pons is a teeny tiny little organ in the brain. And you can think of it as in our emergency brain. At this point, our little human being only knows life and death. And so everything it does to relate to the world, it is either life or death. So when you hear the cry that no sane adult can ignore. You know the one I'm talking about, that newborn baby cry where they are wailing and you're in Walmart and you go, oh, that's a new one. Somewhere in this store, somebody has a teeny tiny little baby. That's that pons level, that's that survival level cry. That is a cry that is sending out a signal as this is an emergency. Come help me. I'm hungry. I'm going to starve. Because to this brain, everything is life or death. There's no filter yet. There's no regulating yet. They haven't learned that yet. They're still little and tiny. This stage comes sometime between about 1 to 5 months, 2 to 7 months. Every brain is different. And every brain develops on its own schedule and its own path. But these are the averages. So somewhere between 1 and 5 months, this level starts to kick in. So what else happens at this stage? Well, our visual system is learning to take the muscles, the nerves that control the muscles that get our eyes to come outward are being developed during this time period. Think about it. Little tiny babies are often cross-eyed. Or they go cross-eyed frequently because when they get to this 1 to 5 months stage, the nerves are being developed and the brain is learning how to take those cross eyes and bring them out so that they can see. It's really to help them survive. It's scary out there, and those eyes need to be able to look in all different directions to be able to see if there's something dangerous that's going to harm me. Do I need to cry so my caretaker will come take care of me? That's really what's going on in the thinking part of the brain, or in the automatic part of the brain. But what else is developing is horizontal tracking. And the horizontal tracking is something really important for us down the road. So if your child did not develop good visual motor skills during this time period, their eyes may not track well in the horizontal plane. Well, is that a big deal? It is if you're trying to learn how to read. Because if your eyes jump instead of smoothly tracking across the page, then you might skip words when you read, especially the little words. They're the ones that tend to get left out. Or you may miss a letter in a word. So you're reading a sentence and the word is horse, but you read hose because your eyes jumped right over the R. You didn't even see it. It has nothing to do with intelligence and your child having enough intelligence to read. They're smart kids. Their eyes are not serving them well. Jumped right over that letter, and they're reading the wrong words. So then they have trouble with comprehension because that sentence, the hose jumped over the fence, makes absolutely no sense. Okay, let's see. What else is interesting? In our tactile system, this emergency baby is learning the vital sensations, the life or death sensations. Pain is a life or death sensation. Hunger is a life or death situation. Hot and cold can be life and death situations. So at this stage, the little brain is interpreting those signals as life or death. That's why the little baby gives you the cry under that language part. There is the vital cry. It's a cry that you can't ignore. That vital cry gets you to respond to them so that that emergency need gets met. There is also a cycle of trust that is being built during this time period. When a baby at this stage cries, they should not be ignored. They should not be let to cry it out. They must be older than this. Because to this brain, they are looking for who's going to help me. Is the world a safe place for me? When I cry, do my needs get met? And so sometimes what we see in practice with older children who may have been adopted out of, say, a social services situation, or sometimes from our foreign adoptions, their needs were not met when they were in this stage of life. And so as older children, they don't feel pain appropriately. They also lack empathy and remorse, because that goes along with being able to feel pain. If you feel pain appropriately, then you understand what it feels like to inflict pain on someone else. If you don't have an appropriate pain threshold, then it may not make any difference to you to walk by someone and pinch them, or to walk by someone and kick them. Some of our children on the autism spectrum will walk by and pinch people. And it's not because they're really being mean. Sometimes they're doing it almost just to get your attention. But they don't have their pain receptors are not working correctly because it didn't develop during this time period. Hunger is another one. Sometimes we have kids that don't recognize when they're hungry. So it takes an intense amount of stimulation for them to realize it. Think about our kids that don't tell you they're hungry until they are hangry and until they're melting down. And you're like, 10 minutes ago you were fine. What is going on? They were actually probably building up the hunger, but their hunger receptors are not mature enough to give them the early signals that they need so that they eat when it's appropriate, or they ask for a snack, or they alert you, Mom, I'm getting hungry, so that you have time to fix them something to eat before you have a complete meltdown. We've talked about the birth cry. Our hand function for this little Pons level baby is that grasp reflex, that if you put some pressure in their hand, they will grasp it and they won't let go. The next stage up is where the brain learns to let go of the things that they have grasped. All right. Speaking of which, the next step up is the midbrain. So this is more an area. There is a particular part of the brain called the midbrain, but in my work, when we talk about the midbrain, we're talking about the whole area in the middle of the brain, and it encompasses several different parts that are all becoming accessible by the child during this time period. And it starts somewhere around, it can start as early as 3 months. They all overlap. So you're going to see bits and pieces of this at the same time that you see the lower level, because the brain is working on it all kind of at the same time, and they'll move out of one stage and into the next stage, but it's not an immediate process. It's not like one day you wake up and all of a sudden your child can rationalize. It comes in little bits and pieces. So your 6 or 8 month old may sometimes understand when you tell them something and other times they don't. It's because it's not efficient yet, but it's growing and they're in that stage where it's learning and working. So our midbrain comes in sometime around 3 to 4 to 5 months, and this one lasts a long time. This is usually up until the point past walking, 14, 15 months, they're still developing this part of the brain. This is the bridge between that emergency brain where everything is life and death. It's where that emergency brain is where the part of our brain is that gives us our fight, flight, or freeze response, is down there in that pons level. And then we have our rational thinking brain in the cortex that we can rationalize whether something is really an emergency or not. The midbrain is the bridge between the two. The bridge between the everything is an emergency, everything is life or death, and the part of our brain that can rationalize and think and cope with the things that bother us. So our midbrain is the part where we learn to relate and to regulate. Now, interestingly, in the first column, in that visual system, this is the time period when the brain is learning, the eyes, the visual system, is learning how to see detail. Up until this point, the baby can see outlines. So if you think about separation anxiety, little babies will go to anyone. They know who their mother is because they've been trained with her while they were in the womb. They know your rhythms, they know your heartbeat, they know the sound of your voice, but your baby doesn't typically cry separation-wise when they're 2, 3, 4 months old. But as they start to hit this midbrain part and their visual system can now start to distinguish detail, now they know what your face looks like. And now when you try to hand them to grandma, they cry. And poor grandma, it hurts her heart so much because that little sweet grandbaby has come to her with no problem for all this time and now wants to cry. My poor mother-in-law, it broke her heart when my kids hit this stage. Because why is he crying for Meemaw? Meemaw, you know how that goes. Excuse me. So they can now see outlines. They can now see details. And this is the time period when the vertical tracking is being developed. So now we're going to add to our ability to track in the horizontal plane smoothly, the ability to track up and down smoothly. This is when babies start to realize that there are things above their head. They start to notice airplanes. They can now look up because now their visual field is opening for them. As well, this is when down the road, so let's say you have 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grader, high school or whatever, this is how we learn to put numbers in a column and track them vertically. It is also how we get from one line to the next line when we're reading paragraphs. We have to be able to track in the vertical to be able to do that easily without having to use our finger or a marker to keep our place for us. So if you have a child who reads, who gets to the end of the line, and when they come to the other one, they end up in the wrong place, and they have to go back and find where they are, they probably have poor vertical tracking. The other thing that's developing visually at this point that's really important is something called convergence. Convergence is a cortical skill, so it is refined up in the cortex, but its foundations are in the midbrain. And that is when both of our eyes are learning how to work together. And so when our eyes are both looking at an object together and focusing on that object at the same time together, it's called convergence. It's the same as depth perception. It gives us our ability to tell how far away from something we are. It's also what gives us our ability to catch a ball. So if you are throwing a ball with a toddler, chances are it's going to pop them in the head. But if you're playing ball with an 8-year-old, they should be able to manage that the ball is coming right at them or the ball is coming off to the side. Football players need really good convergence and depth perception because that football is coming at them and they're trying to get it right in the pocket. They need it to land right there so they can cuddle it and head for the goal. Soccer players, the ball is coming at you. You've got to figure out where it is. Your convergence needs to be working well because when our eyes don't converge well, it gives us a distorted view of things. I have personally experienced glasses that will take your eyes out of convergence so that I could understand what that feels like. So when I put those glasses on, I would swear to you that a straight door frame was bent like this. The other interesting thing was in that experiment, if I had my eyes opened and felt the door frame, it felt curved to me. If I closed my eyes, it felt straight. Our visual system is our primary system of input. Your eyes will tell you what you hear, what you feel. So if you hear something, if your eyes saw it, they will tell you what it is no matter what you hear. If you see something and you feel it, your eyes have already told your hand what it's about to feel. It was an interesting experiment. So our visual motor system is super important. In that auditory system, we had the little baby that startled and cried at most every sound. Your little, 2, 3, 4-month-old baby is going to startle and then cry. Our midbrain baby, auditory-wise, is now going to hear something and start to understand what is scary and what is not. This is where we start to get meaningful sound appreciation, the lilt in your voice. So this baby may not understand your words, but they will understand the tone of your voice. So if you speak to them in sweet sing-songs, you can say things like, "You are the worst, stinkiest, ugliest baby in the whole world. Ew!" And they will giggle because they are understanding the lilt of your voice. If you say to them, "You are the sweetest baby on the planet," they might cry because they don't understand the words, but they're learning what the tone of voice means. If this part of the brain is underdeveloped or doesn't develop completely, here's where our social skills lie. These are kids who go to school or go out into the community and they're playing on the playground and some kid is not being nice and says, "Yeah, sure, you're my new best friend." And the little boy comes home and says, Mommy, I went to the park today and I made a new best friend." Did he? No. But his auditory system is immature and doesn't understand what that meaningful sound is, what the meanings in the sounds of our voice are apart from just the words. These are the kids too that sometimes don't alert to their name being called. So if you have one like I did where you have to call their name over and over and over, I'll use my daughter Allison as an example. Allison, 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 Allison. Oh, got her attention. It's not until the sensory input is so strong that they will respond. So if you have a child that you call 5 times to come to dinner because you can't break them out of a task, your name is the most important word in the universe to you. If I'm in a crowd of 100 people and someone says my name, I'm going to stop and look at them. I'm going to see, are they talking to me? Are they talking about me? Or are they talking about someone else? It's the most important word. I alert to it every time someone says my name. If your child is not alerting to their name, they probably have a little gap in this auditory system. Our tactile system, another really important one, because this is where all those sensory things lie. This is where we learn to regulate how we respond to how things feel. Our clothes, are we picky about what clothes we wear? Lights, sounds, all the textures in foods, hot foods, cold foods, crunchy foods, smooth foods, bright lights, sunlight, dim lights. We're learning to regulate. Our brains are learning at this point, before we're thinking about it, how to regulate all of that sensory input that's coming into us. This is the time period of relating and regulating. So I'll give you an example of the difference between this and the cortex. My oldest son is on the autism spectrum. He's 28 years old now. But when he was a little guy, he could not tolerate the sound of a flushing toilet. So he would do this, but then he couldn't flush the toilet. And he really liked to push buttons. And he really liked to push things. So at about 3 years old, 3.5, he's being potty trained. We would go in places, and he figured out that if he did this, he had a hand free. And now he could flush the toilet all by himself and be a big boy. Awesome. Now, this is a coping skill. His thinking brain figured out a way to help him deal with something that is uncomfortable for him. When we work on the sensory system in the midbrain part of the brain, we are helping the brain regulate so that that loud noise doesn't bother him anymore. So there's no longer a need to put fingers in the ears. Do you see the difference? The thinking brain can come up with all kinds of compensations. Our cortexes are smart, and they are very, very good at helping us with things that did not develop well. So down the road, if you have a lot of that stuff and it's really interfering with your life, then you may want to do some sort of intervention. The mobility piece. Okay, I'm going to back up for just a second because the mobility piece is really important. At the beginning, I said to you, we don't learn to move, we move in order to learn. The interesting part about the mobility piece of all of these functions is that it is not only the window into each level of development, it's the key to resolving gaps in that level of development. So what's the mobility piece for a baby that's 6 to 12 months old? They creep on their hands and knees. It is their first experience with gravity. They get up and they learn balance, and they start wobbling around on their hands and knees, and they rock forward and backward, and they fall over sideways, and they fall backwards on their behinds, and they fall forward on their face. They fall a lot. They're pretty resilient at that age. That activity is what triggers the brain to go grow all of those levels of function. So having time on the floor, creeping on your hands and knees is incredibly important. I kind of skipped the one from the pons level, which I shouldn't have. That is belly crawling. The access to that level, that early pons level, is belly crawling. It's why tummy time is so important, that we get those babies down on their tummies and they spend a lot of time on the floor where they can move themselves around. And our language piece, 6 to 12 months, the little baby is babbling, starting to mimic you. They're not probably saying words yet. Typically, words and walking come at the same time. So within about a month of each other, first steps and first words will usually come close to the same time period. That's actually a good indication that the cortex has come on board, that your baby is starting to have access to that thinking brain. It's when they start walking, because walking is a cortical skill. Being able to use your body in a cross pattern is a cortical skill. In our hand function, we've grasped things, we've learned how to let go of things, and now we get into something where we can begin to manipulate things, and we learn this motion with our arms, which leads to good fine motor skills, believe it or not. This is the gross motor skill that leads to good fine motor skills. So before we're needing to put pencils in their hands, we've got to get the good gross motor skills going. So there are two parts of the brain that are being developed during this time period that are incredibly important. The first one is the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as your gatekeeper. All of our sensory input comes in and goes to the thalamus. Now, the thalamus sorts everything for us, and it puts it in one of 3 categories. This is important. Pay attention to it. Hopefully, right now, all of your thalamuses are saying, hey, what she's saying is important. I should pay attention to her. Your thalamus might take in information and go, this is not important. I can ignore it. If the air conditioning comes on, or if someone's wiggling around in their chair, your thalamus will go, that's not really important. I can ignore that and pay attention to what needs to be paid attention. The third thing that it does is it goes, uh-oh, this is an emergency. And it shoots that down into the amygdala, which is our fight, flight, or freeze response, and invokes that emergency response from us. So the thalamus is really important. It is developing during this time period. So if our thalamus is inefficient or underdeveloped, we get kids with a lot of our attention issues. Our attention deficit kids are not usually attention deficit, they are over-attending, because their thalamus is having them attend to everything, whether it's important or not. And so having a good, mature midbrain gives us the ability to sort that information that's coming in, so we know this is what I need to attend to right now, or this is not what I need to attend to. I can ignore this, I need to pay attention to this, or uh-oh, this is an emergency, let me run away. The other piece that's developing that's really interesting is our corpus callosum. This is a part of the brain, it is between the two hemispheres. And doctors used to think that its sole purpose was to hold the two hemispheres together and keep them from falling apart, because without it, they would fall. It's holding them together. However, it is a fibrous organ that is full of little pathways, and it is the connector between our left and our right hemispheres. Well, what we know now is that our left and right hemispheres communicate back and forth all the time. And we need the most efficient, the ability for that information to go back and forth very efficiently and very quickly. We know that it shuts down, at least partially, when we are stressed. Memory issues can be related to corpus callosum because the brain has put things in different places and it knows where they are. And it knows it needs to get them, but most of the time it has to cross the corpus callosum. The signals have to cross through that fibrous part to get to the place where the memories are stored so that you can bring them out and get them right on a test. So if you have a child that knows their facts, they know their math facts, they know their, whatever, but you decide to give them a test one day to see, have they learned what I have tried to teach them? So you go into one of the assessments and they completely bomb it. And you're like, I know he knows this. It may be because under stress, his corpus callosum becomes inefficient and he can't remember the things that he knows. We also see this with kids who are really good decoders, but really poor comprehenders, because we decode words on one side of our brain and we create the little movie, the little pictures that give us the comprehension on the other side. So if you are reading, the brown horse jumped over the fence, it was a beautiful day, you read that. On the other side of your brain, you've created a little picture. Yours might have puffy white clouds and a blue sky and a red barn and a white fence and this big beautiful green field and a brown horse that's jumping fences. That picture is not accessible if your corpus callosum is inefficient. So we have kids who are really good at decoding words, but really poor at understanding what they read when they have corpus callosum issues. Some of our letter reversal issues are corpus callosum. Coordination has to do that with that as well. So it's a really important piece that is developing at this part. Now, our cross the midline activity, some of you in your physical activity parts of your curriculum are probably doing a lot of cross body work. That exercises the corpus callosum that is already there, and those are really good activities to do, but it will not build new connections because it's working in the cortex. It's working in the part of your brain that's already there and making connections, but we're going to try to build them from the bottom up. Okay, back to midbrain. Do you recognize any of these challenges in your kids, in your family? Do you think your child might be inefficient or disorganized? Well, what can we do about it? Oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we are. Okay. What can we do about it? The work that I do is called neurodevelopmental movement. It is a program of sensory and neuromotor activities. It is designed to be done at home in the context of a supportive family. It is a series of activities that are research-based that you do with your child every day to build neurons. Basically, a neuron will grow the width of a human hair in a day if you do the program every day. So it is a program that's designed to be done at home. It has typically 3 parts that are important. You have a movement piece. That is typically floor work. We have to recreate the movements that we made in infancy. Even if we are grown well past them, that doesn't mean that we don't need them anymore. And remember, the movement piece is the access to that level. So if we have an issue from that early pons level, when the movement activity is belly crawling and tummy time, we're going to put a child back down on the floor and have them move across the floor on their belly. even if they're 14, 15 years old. They can do it. It's very hard, but they can do it. It's hard physically. I shouldn't say it's hard. It's not a hard activity at all. It's just, it's physically hard if you haven't done it for a while. So typically the families that I work with, they all get really strong because they're all back down on the floor. If we see midbrain deficits, I'm going to have you creeping on your hands and knees. That one is just a fun one. We turn it into all kinds of games and whatnot, but that's the activity, that's the movement activity that signals the brain that this is the part that it needs to go build neurons in. The second piece of a neurodevelopmental movement program are patterns, and these are researched body movements that used to be reflexes. So when your baby was little, there were reflexive things that it did. If it turned its head to one side, it would be looking at an outstretched arm. It's a reflexive movement. We're going to recreate some of those reflexive movements to tell the brain, to trigger the brain to go grow neurons in that particular area. The third piece of a program is a sensory piece, which is just stimulating the inner ear fluid. There are little teeny tiny hairs in our inner ear that have nerves on the end of them, and those nerves directly connect to our cerebellum. And our cerebellum is a key area for balance, memory, visual motor skills, and body awareness. All right. Now, are there some things that you can do from home to help your child's brain develop? Absolutely. These are three fairly easy ones. The first one is hands and knees creeping. We just talked about it. It's the access to the midbrain. That midbrain area is crucial for so many of our lifelong skills, our attention skills, our body awareness, that ability to know where you are in relation to other people and other things. For example, I used to teach preschool. We did a snack. I had at least one child every year that if I put the water cup down in front of them, I knew it was going to be spilled. We learned, my assistant and I learned, their water cup goes way over here and their goldfish go right here, because they were going to spill the water on the goldfish and we're going to have tears. So it's the people who sometimes are clumsy. They tend to run into door frames or the corners of tables or the edges of chairs. Or they might be like my father's best friend, a close talker. Bless him, he talks to you from right here. And if you back up a step because he's in your space, he takes a step forward and he's back here. And he will back you across a room until you have a wall at your back, and then he's right in your face. He does not have good body awareness to know where his appropriate space is. The children I taught in school, some of them would go to sit down on the carpet next to each other, and one would almost sit in the other one's lap. Not because they were trying to irritate the other child, which it sometimes did, but because they just had a very poor awareness of where they are and where other people are and where physical objects are. And so that's a really important piece. That is developed during the midbrain, and that is something that hands and knees creeping will help enhance. So anything that your child learns when they are creeping on their hands and knees on the floor, they will learn faster and they will retain more, because it's a memory area as well. So if you're trying to teach your child the presidents in order, lay cards out on the floor and have them hands and knees creep by it and say them out loud. The first president was George Washington. The second president was, whatever. They can say it out loud. Hearing it also helps with memory and whatnot. But that activity, doing it at the same time, helps them with memory and helps with learning. But as they do that activity daily, they are increasing the connections in the midbrain part of their brain. Let me give you some skills that are developed during hands and knees creeping. Balance, remember that's when our little baby gets up on hands and knees and learns to balance. Convergence, depth perception, being able to focus on the same thing at the same time. Left-right hemisphere communication is developed during creeping. Impulse control, that's a big one for a lot of us, being able to control those impulses. Think of our corpus callosum like this, those two hemispheres, as one side is your little brother brain, or little sister brain, whichever, and the other is your big brother brain. And so the little brother brain is excitable and hyper and impulsive and gets really keyed up. This is the one that gets really upset when he doesn't get his way. The big brother brain needs to be able to come across the corpus callosum and help him get his act together. If that corpus callosum isn't working efficiently, we have kids who have meltdowns that they can't recover from. I have some clients who have hour-long meltdowns on a daily basis sometimes. These are kids that are struggling. This is really hard. It's normal to get upset. You lose a game, you're upset, especially if you're 8. You know, I lost. You're mad. You might be mad for a couple of minutes. You shouldn't be mad for 60 minutes in your room throwing things around. But if that corpus callosum is inefficient, that little brother brain is mad and angry and the world is out to get me. And big brother brain can't get across to help him get his act back together. That's a corpus callosum issue, those meltdowns that you have trouble recovering from. That is all helped midbrain creeping, hands and knees. Reading comprehension, we talked about that, decoding on one side, pictures on the other. Being able to retell a story appropriately. Sensory integration develops during midbrain. This is the activity of midbrain, and those attention skills. The second piece that you can do is vestibular activities. Things that stimulate that fluid in your inner ear, that stimulates those nerve endings that are in your inner ear, that connect to your cerebellum, that controls visual motor skills, horizontal tracking, vertical tracking, convergence. It affects your balance, that's your coordination, your ability to play sports well, your body awareness, the proprioception of where objects are, where things are, and kind of just an awareness of the world around you. If there's something in the floor, instead of you stepping on it as you walk by, you learn to step around it. It's an innate thing that we have when we have good body awareness. And also memory is enhanced by vestibular system, vestibular activities. What can those be? Swinging, bouncing, rolling, spinning. Think thick liquid that needs to get sloshed up, like if it was in this water bottle. Slosh, 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 and then it's thick. So it takes a few minutes for it to settle back down. You only need 15 seconds of vestibular stimulation to get 100% signal sent to that cerebellum. So you can swing for 20 minutes. Awesome. If your kid likes to swing, go, go, go. But the first 15 seconds is what's giving 100% stimulation. And then it needs time to settle. So about 5 minutes at least of something calm. And then another stimulation can be done. So with my homeschool families, we build it into your daily curriculum. Between math and reading, you do 5 cartwheels. Run outside and do 5 cartwheels. Takes about 15 seconds. You have now stimulated the vestibular system. They come back in, they sit down, they do math. The end of math, do 10 log rolls back and forth across the den floor. You've rolled, you have now stimulated that liquid in the inner ear and gotten some vestibular stimulation. The third thing that you can do is called brachiation. What in the world is brachiation? Brachiation is monkey bars. When we get our arms up, we open our lungs. When we open up our lungs so that we can breathe better, we take in more oxygen. When we take in more oxygen, there's more oxygen in our bloodstream, which in turn is more oxygen to our brains. So let me give you some benefits of brachiating. Increased oxygen to the brain, improved breathing, improved posture. The kids who come to me that sit like this and talk to me all tucked down, I will encourage lots of brachiating because we want them up here and talking to us up here, not tucked down here and talking down into their chest. Many of them are kind of sunken chest looking. Increased hand and arm strength, that's kind of obvious. Improved visual motor. You have to look at where that monkey bar is if your hand is going to get it while you're swinging back and forth. Eye-hand coordination is improved. They also get better definition of laterality of the brain, and that's a high cortical skill, but it's being right-handed, right-footed, right-eared, right-eyed at both far point and near point. It's just organizing the brain better when you do brachiating. So I have people that say to me, but my kid can't do monkey bars. He hates them because he can't do them. Well, you don't learn to do anything by doing the hard part first. You do the easy part first. So you take them out and you put them on the monkey bars and all y'all do is hang. You just hang. You hang at the one across from him, and if your feet are on the ground, pick your feet up, see how long you can hang. But just hanging will open up the lungs. And so for a week, for 2 weeks, you might just hang. It might be 5 seconds is all they can do. And then you'll all of a sudden, we're hanging for 10 seconds and 20 seconds and 30 seconds. And within a couple of weeks, now we're swinging a little bit, but we're not letting go. We're in the next stage. We can swing a little as we're brachiating. Again, when our arms are up and we're hanging, we're getting extra oxygen to the lungs. You're going to be tired. You're going to be breathing heavy just from hanging. Eventually, they'll get brave and they'll let go with one hand. And they'll probably fall. That's okay. And then eventually, they're going to get brave enough to swing with that one hand. And now their eyes are going to have to figure out where that second bar is. If their visual motor skills are poor, that might take a while because they've got to find it. They've got to figure out where it is. But the benefits are amazing. Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more, I have this QR code is my contact information. If you are interested in talking to me about a neurodevelopmental program, I would love to talk to you. If you have questions, I would love to answer them. We have about 5 minutes. If you have a question, I would love to answer it if anyone has one. Just say it loud enough for me to hear it. Anybody? Yes?
What kind of results do you see with children on this autism spectrum in particular? I know that's a wide range.
No, that's okay. The question is, what results do I see with kids on the spectrum? So if you think about our kids that are diagnosed with all of the 3-letter things, autism spectrum, sensory processing, auditory processing, generalized anxiety, OCD, ODD, all of them, they all have 3 letters. How did they get diagnosed? Well, there's a checklist. The checklist are the symptoms from the chart. I'm gonna back up while I'm talking to you. So the symptoms are all of the foundation of all of those symptoms are there. So what we see in the kids with autism is increased ability to tolerate sensory, if their sensory system is struggling, better auditory processing, the ability to get out of that focus of I'm stuck in this and can't be interrupted out of it. That's an auditory system immaturity. Sensory system's the one I always think of. I'm trying to think of some of the other symptoms. Tolerating noises gets better, meltdowns gets better. I can't say to you, if you do a program, and I will tell you this, an NDM program is not it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, because we're growing neurons the width of a human hair every day. So the average amount of time that you do a program is 18 to 24 months. And that depends on the severity of the symptoms and how consistent you are with doing the program. But what I say at the first 3-month assessment, because you come to see me about every 2 to 3 months. So you're doing this from home. You only have to come to Charlotte 3 or 4 times a year. At that first assessment, what I hear from parents is, okay, we were having the hour-long meltdowns every day. Now we're having 30, 40-minute meltdowns twice a week. So that's how we know we're on the right path. We're making progress. In 3 months, they're not going to be done, but they're going to be making progress. And sometimes it's big progress and then a little bit of progress and big progress and a little progress. Our kids on the autism spectrum typically have a lot of midbrain issues. So a lot of sensory system, a lot of social skills issues. That auditory piece tends to be big for them. The tactile piece tends to be big for them. Sometimes the hand function piece, because they have really poor handwriting and fine motor skills as well. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
But if you were to round it together, how much time a day is a family committing?
Great question. The question is, how long does it take every day? If you put it all together, it's about 30 to 45 minutes of activities a day. Now, the vestibular part is 2 minutes worth, but they're in 15-second spurts. So that's 2 minutes of your day, but it's, kind of you fit them in where it works. The movement piece is sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 30, 40 minutes, and the patterns piece usually takes about 10. And you can do that in 5-minute increments. So you can do it in between things. Like I love the homeschool clients that I work with because they have so much flexibility in their day, where the students that are in school all day, they get home and they have a limited amount of time, so they're trying to squeeze everything in. They're trying to do something before they leave for school. So you do it every day. It becomes part of your routine. Think of it as your exercise program. We find ways to figure out how to make it work for each individual family. Yes, ma'am.
And are these permanent fixes, or do you find folks
Great question. Yes. The question is, are these permanent fixes, or will you need to revisit it? Barring a head injury, these are permanent. So the connections that you make are permanent, just like they would have been if they were done naturally through the developmental sequence. Basically, all we're doing is bringing you through the developmental sequence that should have been done in infancy, but may not have, for a whole host of reasons. It can be injuries, it can be surgeries, it can be just a lack of ample time doing the activities that you would have done in infancy. Sometimes if we put our babies in buckets a lot, like we have them in exercisers and bouncy seats and things, we are restricting their ability to move. And some brains need a lot of floor movement. So there's no way to know going in how much floor time your baby needs, but sometimes we get kids who spend a lot of time in, they're the youngest of 5 kids. Yep, for their safety, they were in an exerciser because the big kids would have killed them. So in order to keep them safe, we put them in equipment, but then down the road we go, oh my goodness, he really is having a hard time attending. And so, yes ma'am.
So if you've got an 8 and 11-year-old crawling on the floor, are they supposed to be doing learning activities while they're doing that, or just crawling?
They can, but they don't have to. So you can incorporate lots of learning into those activities. So if you want to incorporate it, if you're a really creative person, you can incorporate learning into it. I typically make games for my clients when they come, especially the younger ones, to help them motivate. So I have one that's a fish, they're laminated fish bowls and fish. And the fish bowl's dirty, so you've got to get the fish from this fish bowl to this fish bowl so you can clean that one. They put a little fish in their pocket and they crawl across the floor. But I have ones that have multiplication facts and addition facts and words and spelling and all kinds of things like that. So you can do it either way. They can just belly crawl, or they can be doing activities at the same time. Our time is up, but I will be downstairs in about 5 minutes, and I would love to speak to you. Thank you so much for your attention and your time. I really, really appreciate it.